Well, this is a throwback crew call. We are going to take you back in time when E. Smith was just a wee little young man, when I was calling AA baseball and parts unknown. And
you're only 5 years older than me, man.
and Jack had his tie undone and was yelling and screaming at officials. Sherm was bouncing that ball, doing sensational things, probably at this point toward the tail end of high school, headed toward VCU and all the greatness. And the great Leo Routens was just winding up his professional career. Jonesy was holding down the fort, speaking the truth about hoops and what was to come. Jonesy, I want to start with you. Take us back before 1995, 1988 expansion in the NBA. Then once again, leading up to 1995, Canada gets two teams, the Vancouver Grizzlies and the Toronto Raptors.
It was really an exciting time, Matt, for Canada. We've since unfortunately lost the team in Vancouver as Canadians, but it was really an exciting time. And basketball was starting to build its widening base, because you could always come to Canada and find good basketball from a high school, university level. It just didn't have the acclaim. And now you get the Raptors and the Grizzlies come to town, and suddenly there's two Canadian teams. There's a rivalry. There's East-West. There's all of those good things in Canada around basketball. And Leo knows this. The Canadian basketball fans jumped in right away. The other people were kind of on the periphery and wanted to see what it was about. You had some real active consumers, you had passive consumers, and then you had the other half that were the passive detractors and the naysayers. And it took some time, but as we see, it eventually built.
But all of a sudden now you have the NBA in both coasts. And I think so many people embraced that. It brought in new people that never been around the game of basketball. And there was a lot of people that said, it's not going to work. But, I have an interesting gauge on that one, Matty, that if you look at the beer leagues in Toronto, right? And now they're comparable with – now these are the guys that used to play the game, now just want to keep playing a little bit, whether they were college guys, whatever level they played at. And they're working guys. They got families. They got the whole bit. And the beer leagues of Toronto are comparable with Chicago, New York, and LA. You can play every single night in the city of Toronto if you want. And who are these guys? They're paying customers, right? They're the ones that are dying for this to happen. Their kids are playing. They're being introduced to the game. And when people said, it's not going to work in Toronto or Vancouver, hey, it's going to work. Everybody's been waiting for this. And when more and more people get introduced, which is what happened, it just became, as we know, something really, really special. So for a long-time basketball lifer like some of you other guys, it was just incredible to see it finally happen and came to our country.
Leo Routens, of course, grew up looking at the Buffalo Braves. One of the reasons why he wears number 11, the great Bob McAdoo, who played for the Buffalo Braves, and they have a great history. This is actually the second time that Toronto had an NBA team. Of course, they were in the inaugural season. First ever NBA game were the New York Knicks playing at Toronto. The reason why it was the first game, it happened on a Friday night because the Maple Leafs, when the rest of the league was starting on Saturday, of course, had Saturday booked for Hockey Night in Canada. So the first ever game in the NBA were the Knicks at the Toronto Huskies. All right, Eric, here you are. You're coming out of college. You're working in the industry. And take us back to the name, the colors, all that gets announced. And you're on the ground floor of that.
From the get-go, I had the opportunity to kind of be around the team, albeit in a collegiate reporter's role. And just a couple of years later, as an intern at the radio station at the Fan 590, starting to cover games with Elliot Friedman, and George Strombolopoulos, the two original reporters at the Fan, and being around the game and being in the locker rooms at the Sky Dome. I was a fan in the stands for the draft, for the expansion draft, booing Damon Stoudemire and chanting for Ed O'Bannon. So it was surreal to see it all come together. And then in a relatively short amount of time to be a part of it as an actual member of the media, and then to grow with it as it continued on, and the fan acquired the radio rights and whatnot, and working with Jack and Chuck Swirsky and everybody. It was just kind of a blur how it all came together. And I always say that I'm lucky that I was in college and graduating college at pretty much the time that this was all happening, because it wouldn't happen, I think, in today's day and age for somebody of my age sort of being right place, right time, opportunity knocking, not a lot of people covering the game or wanting to cover the game or even caring about the game. But as Leo said, there's this hardcore group of basketball fans, players, passionate supporters. And I just happened to be, as I say, right place, right time, and landed myself a great opportunity.
Jack, they end up bringing in Isaiah Thomas to run the show. What did that mean to a franchise that was just getting underway? Here you have Isaiah Thomas, who was, as we all know, tough as nails, played for Bobby Knight at Indiana, and a part of the bad boys with the Detroit Pistons, and winning, of course, back-to-back titles, Chuck Daly, the head coach.
No, I think what it brought in the basketball community was a guy that, obviously, as you mentioned, based upon his resume, a major name, a guy that had, was going to be in the Hall of Fame. And I think it was important for Toronto to have someone like that in the beginning to draw some attention. And more importantly, a guy that can go out and sell the game and be a tremendous ambassador for the growth of the sport, not only in Toronto, but Southern Ontario and across Canada. And I think Isaiah Thomas's charisma and personality and street cred really helped the Raptors in the beginning. Now, you could have all sorts of discussions about was he qualified, this, that, the other thing. But I tell you what, if you look at Isaiah Thomas as a personnel man, not only in Toronto, but all through his career, the guy picked players and did a good job picking players. He had a good eye for it. So in my opinion, he was an ideal guy to start things off with.
Sherm, it's interesting. I understand that Eric Smith was booing Damon Stoudemire, Mighty Mouse.
And I was wrong. I was wrong.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, you were. Oh yes, you were. But even in today's game, the draft picks of Isaiah Thomas and some of the moves, even later on with the New York Knicks, and he really did have an eye and does have an eye. And in a day and age when so many people always went big, big, big early, he went, you know what, I'm a point guard. We need a point guard. We need somebody to run the show. And Sherm, they go out and get Mighty Mouse with their first pick.
Well, you think about it. I mean, Isaiah Thomas understood at that time in the NBA that you won by having a great point guard and having a good big man. And he understood that if you're going to get into offense, if you're going to run offense, you need a good point guard that's going to be able to organize your team. And at that point, Damon Stoudemire was kind of ushering in that scoring point guard as well, the guy who could get it going offensively and just get buckets on his own, as well as assists. And who better than to know that and recognize that than Isaiah Thomas, a guy who was that kind of point guard. And, everybody, as we've all talked about, they wanted Ed O'Bannon. Everybody wanted Ed O'Bannon. And when you look at the careers after the fact, it's clear that Isaiah made the right decision for a franchise that was just trying to put itself on the map and needed those eyes. And don't take for granted also the fact that Damon Stoudemire, being an undersized point guard, kind of fit the bill. He was going to work hard. He was going to get it done. He was going to play in a game of big men, and he was going to attach to the heartstrings of basketball fans because of his ability to score. So I just think that there's a lot of creativity in that decision for Isaiah Thomas, but at the core of it, it was based on understanding that if you're going to be a good team, if you want a chance to win, you need a good point guard, and you're going to need a big man. And I think Isaiah showed that by drafting Damon Stoudemire.
And then, Leo, so many topics here early on in the beginning of the organization's history, but take us back to the first ever game. There you are broadcasting the first ever game in the history of the Toronto Raptors?
It was an incredible night. It was the New Jersey Nets, and you looked around at the whole arena, the Sky Dome. It was packed. The energy there was unbelievable. It was honestly, I can sit there and picture myself there. The bright lights, the NBA had arrived. You had the Raptor and his mascot out there, and the energy in the city. It was kind of a precursor to what we're seeing today. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that really didn't know what it was. There were a lot of people that were dying to be a part of the whole thing, and then it was finally here. And the game, the Raptors won the game. And here's something I got to be careful when you say something like this because people react in funny ways. If you take that roster and put it in today's game, that's a pretty good team. You can ask Alvin Robertson in the backcourt with Damon Stoudemire. I mean, come on, those guys can play. And I'm looking at some of the other guys that roster. I mean, you got Jean Tabak, a 7-footer, Eddie Pickney, Tracy Murray can shoot, Oliver Miller as a big body. Hey, people laughed at Oliver Miller being this big fat dude, but I'll tell you what, that dude can play. Now we saw him this season in Phoenix, and if he had looked the way he did now, it's not going to be a different story. But there was some talent on the team. Brendan Malone, their first coach, and I think you talk about Isaiah. Isaiah wasn't just a suit; he was a personality. I think Brendan Malone too. He used to do these coaches clinics for the coaches, introduce them to the media, introduce them to the game of basketball. He also had, I think, a great personality to help the game grow. But it was quite an evening. I'll never forget being so happy to be a part of the first ever game in Toronto, our second ever opening game in Toronto.
Quickly, Matt, before you go on. First of all, Leo, that team will get killed now in this NBA. They don't shoot the three well enough. That's the bottom line.
Tracy Murray, Willie Anderson.
They do not shoot the three well enough. And those big bodies can't defend on the three-point line. That's nonsense. Second of all,
when
you think about
the truth.
Wait, you think about Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas was pretty fresh off of winning a couple championships. So, Jack, you talk about the street cred. It was valid. People knew Isaiah was a champion. And him being a point guard, understanding the value he brought to a championship run, he came in with instant credibility about the point guard position and his decision on drafting Damon Stoudemire.
One point on the differences between the two franchises, the Raptors and Isaiah Thomas, good eye for talent. You roll the dice. If it doesn't work, we're moving on. We're going to somebody else, some other player. We're going to try something different. Vancouver took guys, hung on to guys, bad decisions, kept them, paid them, and they couldn't compete. They couldn't win because of that. And there wasn't that appeal, the same appeal, whereas that championship mentality Isaiah brought, he was competing all the time. Even though he knew that they couldn't win or they only wanted to win so many games because of the draft, he was still competing every game. And you had to come and beat the Raptors, and it was a whole different story what was happening out in Vancouver.
Hey, Eric, when you think about the Raptors in the early years, you'd be remiss if you didn't bring up the fact, especially now during the Last Dance and everything with the Michael conversation, that the Toronto Raptors defeated the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, and what, 37,000 people at Sky Dome with people sitting about a mile away out in right field looking over the stands onto the court that seemed like a million miles away, and the energy inside that stadium for that ball game. It's interesting when I think about that game specifically as well, Matt, and just how it's just one moment and otherwise the incredible 72-10 season. But that was like a mini championship for the Raptors, especially in the early years for Raptor fans to knock off MJ and the Bulls, to contain Jordan the way that they did for major parts of that game. And the first thing that sort of stands out to me as well, and the guy that's running the show, and again, the guy that I was wrong about, Damon Stoudemire, to go to Sherm's point where, we all have obviously watched the Last Dance. And one of the things that stood out to me was when they talked about drafting MJ and all the bigs from around the league that they got comments from saying, a guy at 6'6" can't control a team, can't run a team. Nobody's going to be able to do that at his size. And here we are more than a decade later, and you've got a guy at 5'10" coming in, running the show, controlling a team. And the mentality, even over a decade plus, that hadn't changed. So to see what Damon was able to do for that team, let alone specifically in that game, Matt, that's where I think you started to even get some of those fans on the periphery that are sort of like, what is this Raptor team? What is this new team? Do I care about this? Suddenly now they knock off Michael Jordan, the Bulls, and I think even more people, as I say, the casuals start to pay a little bit more attention.
Jack, unless it's all of our good friend Wayne Embry in the 1971 Milwaukee Bucks, who won an NBA title the fastest than any expansion team. They started the Milwaukee Bucks in 1968. And, of course, they had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the Big O, Oscar Robertson in 1971. There are always hurdles and stumbling blocks within organizations, right? You're not winning, coaches coming and going, executives coming and going. And the Toronto Raptors really, in their early years, they were no different, Jack.
No, I started with the Raptors in year 4. I got hired in October of 1998. And they were a mess. The third year, Darrell Walker was the coach, and he got fired. And Butch Carter was on board, and Glenn Grunwald was now the GM. He got booed off the court the last game of a 16-66 season. And quite frankly, starting year 4, there were a lot of people, and I was just new to the market, even though I had coached nearby at Niagara, that were very skeptical about the possibility of the NBA really being a long-term viable product in Canada. And obviously the Vancouver Grizzlies, as Leo mentioned, they were even worse shape. And, you look at the one thing that changed it, number 15 from the University of North Carolina, the Raptors were fortunate, and they had the foresight to trade on draft night and to trade Antoine Jameson and get Vince Carter. And you look at where things went from that point, it created a buzz. It created an excitement. And Leo knows this because Leo would do games nationally on both coasts. And Vancouver had Sharif Abdul-Rahim and Big Country and guys like that. And quite frankly, they weren't going anywhere. And the Raptors had hope. They had that young superstar. And I was very fortunate to be on the ground floor to watch this kid. And he was remarkable. And by the way, they had another kid in Tracy McGrady, who was a joy to watch as well. So I give Butch Carter and Glenn Grunwald a lot of credit for what they did and the foundation they finally got to start to put in place when I got there in year 4. To watch that was really cool.
Jonesy, you think about obviously the Vince, but along with Vince, you have the Camby trade, right? Bringing in Oak, that was certainly important. And then in addition to that, you have T-Mac, Tracy McGrady. So Charles Oakley, Tracy McGrady, and Vince Carter, and a foundation is in place, Jonesy.
To Jack's point, you're right, Matt. I love the fact that Glenn Grunwald came in with Isaiah and had that same mentality. I mean, long term, he's thinking championship. And the Oakley trade suddenly gave credibility. Oakley was a guy that fans, I said, for the people that said it wouldn't last, give Toronto 5 years to build their team while people come to watch Ewing and Barkley and Malone and Stockton and Robinson and all these guys. Give them time to build their team in the back. And the Oakley trade, to me, signified the real start of that because you've got somebody who's credible. And then don't forget, in that same time period, when McGrady is there and Carter is drafted, they bring a veteran-laden team in. As Oakley said, Vince and Tracy were the real singers, and we were the backup band. And there was Oakley. They traded for Antonio Davis. They brought Kevin Willis in, Muggsy Bogues, Dee Brown, Del Curry. They traded for Doug Christie. All of a sudden, after 4 years, this team looks like it might be getting to the point where they could make some noise. And to Leo's point, they're still competitive, and they're still, kind of trying to gather the casual fan. And that was the year, Jack, you remember, in the lockout shortened year, it was 23-26 or something like that.
Yeah,
they were close to the playoffs, close to the playoffs, and then boom, with that roster the next year, away you go, Matty.
Not only that, away you go from the Dome and into the Air Canada Center, Sherm, and that certainly changes everything as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about it. I mean, I was at that Jordan game, one of the few games I saw of the Raptors because I was still in school and playing overseas. But, moving to an arena that was more suited and would accommodate the sport, along with the Leafs, obviously, in hockey. But it was a situation where now we're seeing that this is for real. I mean, this is not a team that they're just going to put in some weird spot and kind of keep them in a corner. They put them in an arena where they could get a fan base that would understand that this arena is also built for basketball, paying respect to the game. And now we're seeing the growth of the game. We talk about Tracy and Vince and the explosion that they came with, but the semblance of those veterans plus an arena dedicated to hockey and basketball really showed that not only the city, the province, the country is serious about the game of basketball and getting more understanding of what it takes to foster a successful NBA franchise in the city.
Leo, when you think back, the Dome compared to, and you played in a Dome in Syracuse, but now all of a sudden you walk into the Air Canada Center and boy, does it feel like basketball.
Well, you got to remember, I played in a Carrier Dome, and we averaged almost 30,000 people my senior year. But you could put 2 Carrier Domes inside the Sky Dome, so it was much more cavernous. It was very big, and Eve mentioned you had some 30,000+ fans games in there, and it did have a cool vibe, but it's still not what you call a basketball arena. All of a sudden, you got the Air Canada Center opens up, and you have a basketball arena, not a bad seat in the house. You're right in the heart of downtown. And I just think that was a game changer. And, the Raptors were also very smart. When you think of how, and again, I'll use Vancouver. Vancouver, you played downtown, you practiced out, way out of the city, airport's over here. Where do you live? In Toronto, man, you play downtown, you practice right there. The only time you have to leave downtown is to go to the airport on a non-peak travel day. So it's a perfect setup for a professional athlete to come in and play. And because you had a guy initially like an Isaiah Thomas that was thinking these things, Glenn Grunwald continues thinking these things, and you're putting the team in a right path. But that definitely was a game changer, having that, having the arena, and again, not a bad seat in the house, man. It was a great night, that opening night.
All right, so here it is. We're heading in to the Carter effect, Vince Carter, right? But we don't have any more time in this crew call. So you know what it means? It's over. It's over. We'll see you next time.